Well, welcome, viewers. Welcome to this broadcast from the Mary Baker Eddy Library. I'm Jonathan Eder, Programs Manager at the library, and we're just so excited to be sharing this next hour with you on the subject of Christian Science music and the modern soul. We're broadcasting here from the studio at the First Church of Christ Scientists in Boston, and it's very appropriate that we are broadcasting from here because a lot of the music that you'll be experiencing today was in fact produced in these very studios. So it's kind of coming home, some of it, to its birthplace. But much of the music that you're going to be hearing is very recently produced, not necessarily in this studio, but in other studios. And so it's never really been heard outside of a studio context until today. So I think we're all very privileged to be sharing together with music that is going to be having its first launch, its maiden voyage out into the world through the internet. So it's a very exciting and historical moment that we're all participating in. We have a tremendous panel of musicians and hymnologists to take us through this program. So I'm going to start introducing them to you. In studio with me are Krista Graham and Ryan Vigil. And Ryan is hymn specialist at the Christian Science Publishing Society. So he has really been an anchor, very much involved in the development of new Christian Science music for a supplement to the longstanding Christian Science hymnal, and in terms of a new recording that we're going to get some samples of, and he'll tell us a little bit more about later in the program. And Krista has been an important ingredient in the hymnal projects that Ryan has been so much a centerpiece of, contributing her talents as a musician and as a vocalist. So it's great to have both of you with us.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Good to be here.
And then joining us from out on the West Coast, I was about to say the Web Coast, which may become a term, I don't know. But if so, it's copyrighted. Just please make a note of that. But yes, they're wonderful musicians and have really been trailblazers in the creation of new music that is inspired by Christian Science and by the Bible. And they're Désirée Goyette and Andrew James. So pleased to have you with us, and thanks for getting up early to be with us on East Coast time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Our pleasure.
Just to prepare audience for what you're going to be experiencing, Ryan and Krista are going to be getting up and down a little bit during the program in their dual roles as conversationalists and as performers. So they'll be coming back and forth, and shortly will be performing for us. But as they get into position, I just want to remind you, viewers, that we're always interested in hearing from you, including your thoughts and questions, folding them into our discussion. So just a reminder that there is a Submit Question tab on your computers. And so if there's any kind of thought or inspiration that you have that you want to share, we'll look for ways to embrace it in our conversation. So as we march forward in our webcast, I just want to remind you all that although this is being profiled as new music, it really comes out of that resource, that bedrock of long-standing Christian Science music that has been an inspiration, a healing influence, a blessing for generations over time. And I think you'll see that very much in the work that we'll be profiling from our guest musicians. So Ryan and Krista, we're just very anxious to get started. Mm-hmm. Would you introduce our first song?
Sure. So this is I Am the Lord, is written by Désirée. And many listeners, I think, will recognize it as one of the tunes in the Christian Science Hymnal supplement that came out in 2008. But before it was a hymn, it was a solo that Désirée had written. So people who are familiar with it that are listening in are going to hear a couple of differences. The form is different. So rather than verse, 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 you'll hear a kind of refrain, verse, refrain that happens, and a couple other musical differences too.
And some
So-
text differences, as I recall.
And text differences.
I'm a big fan of the book of Isaiah, so there's a little bit more of Isaiah in the solo.
Yeah.
For those of us who are Isaiah freaks.
Yeah. Okay. I am the Lord, there is none else. There is no God beside me. I girded thee, though thou hast not even known me, but know me from the rising sun to the west. There is none beside me, for I am the Lord, there is none else. There is no God beside me. Even I am he that comforteth you. Who art thou that thou shouldest be afraid of a man that shall die, and of the Son of Man, which shall be made as grass? For I am the Lord, there is none else. There is no God beside me. I girded thee, though thou hast not even known me. Cease ye from man, made of the earth, for wherein is he accounted of? But rather look ye only to him whose life is in everlasting love. For I am the Lord, there is none else. There is no God beside me. I girded thee, though thou hast not even known me. I am the Lord, I am the Lord.
Oh, wow. Bravo. Bravo. Well, thank you so much, Krista and Ryan. That was lovely. Désirée, could you just take us back in time? When did you write that? What was going on in your musical life at the time, and where did the inspiration come from?
Wow. First of all, thank you, you guys. It was so lovely. Thank you. Thank you. I wrote it quite a while ago. I think probably close to 20 years ago. I wrote it. And it was the very first solo that I ever wrote, very first Christian Science solo that I ever wrote. And it was in the lesson, and I was doing solo work at the time, but I was also writing music for television. So a lot of secular music as well. So, you know, my love for jazz, my love for Carole King, my love for, you know, popular music of that time, I'm sure figures prominently still into the type of music that I write. But I really had a yearning as I was doing my solo work to find solos that felt to me more contemporary and therefore conceivably a bit more relevant to the younger members of our congregation. And also to feel that it resonated with me more personally, I guess. So when I read those words from Isaiah, I girded thee, though thou hast not even known me. For some reason, that really struck a chord with me and really inspired me. This idea that even if we aren't aware of God's presence, it's there, upholding us, protecting us at all times. So I went with that. And then the natural cadence of that Bible passage, I am the Lord, there is none else. There is no God beside me. It just naturally fell into a 6/8 rhythm for me. And And that solo was born.
You know, Désirée mentions something there that I'm kind of interested in pursuing a little bit further. She mentioned being active with sort of secular music, and I'm thinking about this from a kind of musicological point of view. We have these categories that we like to place things in, even if we pull them out of those categories later, just as a sort of lens to think about these things. And one of those sort of divisions is, well, in the world of music, you have sacred music and you have secular music. And the idea that there's no crossover there doesn't really hold up in a lot of ways. For example, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, it's a symphony. Theoretically, it's a secular genre, but there's such a deep spiritual component to that piece of music. It's a sacred piece of music. So I'm kind of interested in hearing Désirée's thoughts on the idea of sacred music, what that means, but also aspects of popular music, aspects of music that might not be traditionally thought of within a sacred context, informing your work as a Christian Science composer.
Wow, what a great question. I think whatever the music and really whatever the text, it just needs to touch your heart. It needs to uplift you. It needs to leave you in a place where you weren't before listening to it. And that can be anything. Mm-hmm. That really can almost be anything. You mentioned Beethoven. Oh my gosh, yes, inspiring. Bach, incredibly inspiring. Much of that meant for a sacred context. But many other songs that have, a simple song. I mentioned Carole King earlier. You've Got a Friend. Somehow a song just doesn't get any better than that for me. This simple idea, you've got a friend. Well, we do. We can say, I have a friend in Jesus. I have a friend in the divine. However you want to put it, we are not alone. Just that simple thought, to me, is very inspirational. And so I think that there is crossover. I think that we're allowing ourselves the permission to acknowledge more and more that there is that crossover, that they're not mutually exclusive. And because that would restrict and confine instead of recognizing the very definition of soul with its infinite resources to bless mankind, right? Be it song, sermon, or science, whatever inspires.
Right.
I think that's really what we yearn for as human beings.
I love that.
Yeah. So, Andrew, you also had to start at some point with arranging music inspired by Christian Science. And from what you've heard from Désirée and from Ryan, can you link that to what got you started to arrange and produce in this way?
Indeed, yeah. Good question. So ever since I was probably, 10, I knew that I wanted to be a professional musician, and sort of grew up in doing more, rock and pop music and writing my own compositions, but also performing for others, and being a professional bassist. And I was really involved in that in Boston, actually. And the idea came up, I wanted to move to Los Angeles to pursue that even further. But before I left, the idea came up, what if I took some of my favorite hymns from the hymnal and sort of reinterpreted them, reproduced them in a way that, hopefully could, sort of take the melody and the lyric, but, hear it in a new way. And so that was sort of the genesis of sort of moving into this field. And, it was just something that just sort of came up very naturally, very organically. And I thought, well, there's so many just incredible hymns that we have in our hymnal, musically, as well as lyrically, as well as metaphysically. And I thought, it just seemed like such a fun and unique challenge, and something that was just really inspiring to me to want to take these and sort of reinterpret them. So yeah, the idea just came up, and I, picked a whole bunch of hymns that I really enjoyed, and just started, recording them and reinterpreting them. And that was, I guess, sort of the beginning of it. And what's interesting is we think about, from, I guess, a rock or a pop perspective, Christian rock and Christian pop is such a massive thing now. It's such a huge market, and these artists go out and tour and sell out arenas, and it's but I wasn't even really, thinking about or cognizant of that idea specifically when I started. I just more wanted to take, styles and ideas that felt good to me and apply them to, to the hymns that we have and that we love. And it was just sort of born from that.
Well, let's listen to Communion Doxology from your first CD, I believe, Somewhere to Begin.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that's a great place to begin.
That's so cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just, one of the things that I was reminded of when talking to Brian Ashley, who's the organist at the Mother Church here in Boston, was just how much of a Christian Science service is musical. I mean, I think it constitutes about a third, probably. And if you include postludes and preludes and perhaps even more of what people are experiencing, and it really is where the service begins. And so I just think it was so neat that that you chose the first hymn in the hymnal for your album, Somewhere to Begin, and just that importance, I think, that naturalness of music as a place to bring us into a place of worship and communion. So just curious, in your working with it, were there some aha moments for you in producing that song, metaphysically, musically, or both?
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, well, the interesting thing is I loved that actually was the first song that I demoed actually for the entire record. It was that one and then Oh Dreamer. Those were the two that I actually demoed. And I think I actually did them in the studio where you guys are right now. So it's funny sort of seeing you guys in there and listening to it. So many memories flood back of that time of making that record. But I remember one of the unique challenges of doing that hymn in particular is that it's one verse. I mean, and it's, how are we going to make this longer than 45 seconds, and an interesting part of it, when you look at it in the hymnal, so after each line, we have these fermatas or these holds where you basically sing it, you hold, and then the organist goes on, you sing it again and you hold. And in pop music or rock music, the groove must go on. I can't just do that. So I was trying to think, how am I going to do this? And And I remember sitting down with my bass and kind of coming up with the sort of underlying groove that's there, and that was kind of inspired by a Peter Gabriel-esque sort of groove. And I remember working with the guitar player friend of mine who did all the guitars on the record. His name is Mark, and he came up with this really neat and this beautiful sort of guitar line, this motif that I thought could really actually fit well in between the lines, and so the idea came up. We had the groove, and then it was really just kind of a fun and organic experience to figure out, okay, after we sing, after we sort of finish with the lyrics, how can we continue it on? And it was just kind of a fun process of developing, how piano coming in and guitar coming in, and just sort of different reverse sounds that little studio tricks, and just trying to make it interesting to listen to as it goes on. So that was that was kind of a fun challenge to do, to take something that's so short and yet so familiar, and try to turn it into something that people can listen to and enjoy when they're in their car, or doing just at home, or in whatever context they're in. So yeah, that was a fun song to do, and was really it's sort of the beginning of the CD and the beginning of the 32 hymnal, but was also the beginning of my sort of journey into this idea of taking hymns and sort of reproducing them and re-envisioning them in a way that hopefully people will like. So yeah, it was fun.
That's great. So Désirée and Andrew, you're both very much involved in Ryan and Krista, this hymnal project that you're also involved with. So if you could just tell us a little bit, those of us who maybe don't know that much about what this behind-the-scenes effort has been around new hymns and producing them and recording them.
Sure. Well, one thing to mention is that the production of this upcoming hymnal supplement has been a very extensive one. And one of the things that's emerged from this experience of working on this hymnal is really a renewed awareness and appreciation for the depth and breadth of music making that is going on right now within the Christian Science movement. I was actually interested to note, I've got my concordance to the Christian Science Hymnal and hymnal notes here, and there's a little area towards the back of this book that has a kind of history of Christian Science hymnals, and it has a little note about the 1932 hymnal and the process that went into producing the 1932 hymnal, which involves creating various committees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's one part in here that's really kind of interesting, where it says, the entire Christian Science field was invited through the Sentinel to send contributions to Boston. And that happened again this time. For this supplement, the entire Christian Science field was invited to submit hymns, to either submit hymns, suggest things that already exist that they love, that they would love to see in a Christian Science hymnal. Sometimes people sent in poems. Sometimes people sent in just music that they'd written. Sometimes people sent in full hymns. And it was interesting to note that had taken place with the 1932 hymnal as well, because it's not the most common thing in the world for a denomination in creating a hymnal, or in this case a hymnal supplement, to really reach out to its membership like that and include the membership in terms of contributing. And through the process of receiving all of these submissions and going through them, as I say, one of the things that emerged was just, first of all, an incredible appreciation for just the outpouring of love. I mean, every single thing that was sent in was sent with joy and affection and care and caring, and so that's in and of itself just kind of a wonderful thing to witness. But also the quality of so much of this music, and so, as I say, an appreciation for what Christian scientists are doing as musicians out in the world right now. So one thing that we kind of, I wouldn't say we stumbled upon it, but something that kind of developed as we were working on the hymnal itself and thinking about some of the associated products that we would like to tie into the hymnal was the idea for an audio product that selects certain hymns from the upcoming supplement, and best way to think about it is maybe sort of join certain hymns with certain musicians who are, as I say, out in the world making music right now. And so we've got a CD. It's called Celebration. It's actually available for pre-order right now. So if you go to the online shop, there it is, Celebration. And I think we just got word that, timeline-wise, it's probably going to be hitting our warehouses before the end of the month. So this is moving out into reading rooms and out into the world very, very soon.
That's great.
And so what we're going to hear for the next few minutes is some selections from this that give a sense of what the product is, of course, but also give a sense of that depth and breadth of musical contributions within the supplement itself.
Well, I think we're lucky to have one from you, actually, that we're going to start with. So I'm really glad that made
really
the cut.
More or less a coincidence. It's really kind of amazing to me. There's a hymn that I wrote, and it turns out that I think maybe the reason I wrote it was so that Andrew could do what he did with it on this CD, because it is so cool. I can't wait for you to hear it.
It is. But you and Krista are going to demo the original music, and then we're going to listen to the recording for Celebration.
We'll give you a chance to hear, here's what it's going to sound like in terms of the way that the way it is in the supplement, traditional hymn arrangement, and then you'll hear what Andrew did with it.
Okay, that's great. Well, why don't you take your places? And Andrew, while they're getting into position, when you got that, what did you do? What take us into the life of an arranger?
Well, first, I was so grateful and appreciative that Ryan trusted me with his musical child to sort of take with it and do what I will. And it was interesting when I got this. So I did two hymns that are on the CD, and so when the first one that came in, actually, I looked it over, and the idea was very straightforward. I kind of knew immediately what I wanted to do. But this one, however, was not the case. And I was listening to it and thinking about it actually probably for a good couple of weeks, and thinking, okay, what do I want to do with this? And it's in sort of a 3/4, sort of 6/8 feel. And that's a really interesting time signature, because it can very easily sort of get you into a very specific, feel. And a lot of ideas that we're coming up with just weren't quite feeling right. And so I was really trying to think what to do. And then I actually, oddly enough, was on Facebook, and a friend of mine had posted a video of the great Beatles producer George Martin. And he was talking about Eleanor Rigby and what they did with Eleanor Rigby and with this string octet, and how they recorded it. And it actually was I think the first song or the only Beatles song where none of the Beatles actually played on it. They sing on it, but they actually don't play on it. It's just a string quartet. And I was just so enthralled with it, and I heard it, and I said, and I thought, you know what? I think that would be a really neat approach to sort of take to this. So the idea came up to basically, so I programmed a string arrangement around the chord progression. And then I had that, and I thought, what would be an interesting way to sort of juxtapose against the strings, this sort of classical, thing, was to bring in elements of sort of cinematic music and modern production. So you have this, sort of string arrangement along with a very sort of grand cinematic, massive drums, huge reverbs, a synth bass sort of going underneath it, like this sort of synth arpeggiated line that comes in halfway through. And, I really just sort of tried to juxtapose the two ideas, and it came together gratefully, and submitted it. And, Ryan was really, was happy with it. And at the end of the day, that's all I cared about.
Well, that's great.
that he was happy with it, and that it tried to do some justice to his, beautiful arrangement. So,
well, there's a lot of justice there. Good.
Good.
So, let's hear the original Cry of the Child as you perform it, Ryan and Krista, and then to see how you helped raise it to maturity.
Amazing. And just before we start, just to mention, since we're demoing it, we'll just give one verse, so we won't do the whole thing. So here's the first verse of Ryan's hymn.
touched your heart and made whole your heart now. Go walk in my light. All can hear of it, hearts revealing it, gently moved by your might.
With one accord in one place, in joyful praise of God's grace, we join together in one divine embrace. A rushing mighty Spirit descends from heaven, hear it. I have touched your heart and made whole your heart now. Go walk in my light. All can hear of it, hearts revealing it, gently moved by your might. Of one accord, of one mind, our healing mission we find. We pray together, our lives in worship bind. The Comforter is with us, its presence here assures us. I am guiding you and uniting you through the love of God's Son. I am blessing you, I am healing you, I am making you
Wonderful.
So cool.
It is.
So, did you have any foreshadowing, Ryan, that this is what Andrew was going to do, or were you just
I just knew it was going to be
surprised?
good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a very trusting approach.
Yeah.
One of the things about that I loved, honestly, is the sort of chord progression to it. Actually, it was so neat. And one of my favorite parts about being able to do it and doing the string arrangement with it is oftentimes, when my approach would be, I would sort of look, in the hymnal, and I would basically almost wrap my own chord progression around what worked with the melody. And oftentimes I would make it more simple in order, to sort of to bring it into that kind of pop or rock sort of genre. And that was one of the things I really loved about, and was kind of a fun challenge about doing this hymn in particular, is that the chord progression is constantly moving and changing, and it really gives it a beautiful flow. And sometimes right when you think it's going to go one place, it goes to a different place. And I really, really loved that about it. And it was part of one of my favorite parts about working on it and trying to come up with something that was sort of fun. It was just to do honor and justice to his, really, really interesting and just beautiful, chord arrangements and melody. So that was a really fun part for me.
Yeah. Just curious, Ryan, the words, the lyrics, can you just give us a little background on the writer, James Corbett?
Yeah, James. Well, this is a text that sort of came to me, and I lived with it for a while. So this is actually a writer and a composer who has some other hymns in the upcoming supplement. So there's a wealth of musical depth that this hymn comes out of in terms of the person who wrote the words. So it was written by someone who had the ability to write words and music. So that was kind of an interesting component to it, and I imagine Andrew would agree that the sort of the way that the words are delivered rhythmically, even if you divorce them from the music and just read the words, is pretty interesting. There's a very interesting kind of structure to it. So there's a I can't necessarily think of a better way to describe it except that there's an integrity to it. There's an integrity to the words from a structural point of view, and then that structure is supporting the message, which is basically Pentecostal in nature with one accord. And so when I was working on it, I actually, Désirée's description of her sort of process with I Am the Lord is just completely resonant with the experience that I had with this hymn, is just living with the words for a while and, you know, letting them sort of speak to me. And then sort of, it just kind of happens, doesn't it? It just kind of, you know,
Right.
there's a process of actually stepping aside and letting the music come out, you know.
Just flows.
Yeah.
So Désirée, the next work that we're going to hear involves you as an arranger. So you're performing a similar kind of creative act as we just heard from Andrew with his work on with one accord in one place. But I think many of us know you as a composer and as a performer, and you're a little less known to us as an arranger. So just sort of interested in how you approach this next work, which is with lyrics that are very well known to a Christian Science audience anyway, from These Your Children by Violet Hay. So if you could just sort of take us into what was involved in your process arranging this piece.
Well, I think really a lot like Andrew, I actually do a lot of arranging of other people's music. A lot of times they're just clients that come in with a piece of music that needs some help either structurally or just in terms of doing an arrangement. And I love doing that, actually. I love taking something from someone else and seeing ways to help them actually build on their vision. And or try and bring something unique to it. So I really do love doing that. And yes, these words by Violet Hay, I mean, I just adore them. And I think we all know of other settings of this. And I think the challenge with it, well, for me, it was just taking it, and I wanted to, it demanded to me that it be just really have a feeling of a bunch of people getting together and playing whatever instruments they brought to the table.
Okay.
I wanted that experience of around the campfire jam sort of session, sort of like the Wren Collective, if you're familiar with them, and just have this sense of spontaneity to it. And so that's the direction we took.
That's great. Well, let's hear it as it is on sheet music from in its original form from Krista and Ryan, and then we'll roll in the recorded version with Désirée's arrangement.
From these your children gathered in your name, from hearts made whole, from lips redeemed from woe, your praise almighty shall forever flow. Your praise almighty shall forever flow. Alleluia, 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 alleluia.
From these your children gathered in your name, from hearts made whole, from lips redeemed from woe, your praise almighty shall forever flow. Your praise almighty shall forever flow. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. Oh, perfect life in your completeness held, none can beyond your omnipresence stray. Safe in your love we live and sing away. Safe in your love we live and sing always. Hallelujah,
Bravo.
It's so
You guys-
good.
Oh my God.
You want to know something funny about that, if I can mention this very quickly? It literally, while I was in our living room playing it on the piano, first I played it on the piano. Then I went to our toy box. We call it our toy box. We have all kinds of different instruments in there. I pulled out the recorder and I began playing that counter melody line. And then I got out, did you hear the scratch board at the beginning? It's like a scrub board thing.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't really have a traditional scrub board, but what we have, the neighbors once brought over, it's a metal tie. It's in the shape of a tie. It's a joke thing, but it has a great sound. And you play it with a metal thimble, like you would. So there I was I played that. So I'm wearing a little tie with metal. And then my husband gets out his fiddle and played fiddle on it. And then our engineer, who's an awesome guitarist, pulls out his guitar. So the feeling, the flavor of recording it really was that idea, just what I wanted, this idea of a casual jam session, if you will, around these sweet words.
Yeah, I was thinking, I want to be there, like right now. It's so fun.
That is definitely going to be performed around a campfire in the foreseeable future.
Yay! I hope so.
Well, I imagine people were clapping along at the end there, at their home computers, in their reading rooms, wherever. So I think. And
that's Andrew Sentinella's, yes?
Yeah. And anything you want to tell us about Andrew?
Well, an interesting thing. Andrew, is a British composer, and he did, obviously he loves the setting of these words in the 1932 hymnal, as most of us do, but he wrote this I wouldn't say not for children, but he did write this to a degree with children's voices in mind, with a kind of family atmosphere, with the idea that there's a certain kind of comfort and joyousness that he's trying to communicate there, which I think his music really succeeds in communicating, and I think this arrangement just completely takes home.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Has he heard it? Has he heard this arrangement?
He has now.
I love the breakdown that you do, just the vocal and the clapping, it's so neat.
It's a great thing because it's the kind of thing you can't overuse that. You have to pick your spot, and you found it. It was the exact right time to do that.
It was great. It was great.
Well, I just want to quickly pipe in, because I think Violet Hay would be really pleased with what was done with this. As even I think would Ralph Vaughan Williams, whose music is used in the 1932 hymnal with her words, but she was friends, or at least collegial, with Ralph Vaughan Williams. And he very much, according to this biography of Violet Hay from Peter Hodgson, Hay and Williams and others in England at the time wanted to introduce hymn tunes based on local folk melodies that reflected the musical taste of the time. And that we were so she was part of this greater movement to reform church music, to make it more accessible, to make it connect more with people in that period. And it's so interesting to me that her words still are doing that now in the 21st century. So, and that same spirit that's informing this work of really wanting to have music that speaks to people's real experience, their daily lives, their culture, and which informs what they are feeling and experiencing most deeply. And it seems to be that place where that music is so effective at speaking to and touching. So it's wonderful that you're doing this. And so our next work is one that you composed, Désirée. Father, you are very near us, and in the recording, it's your voice, Krista. So we're going to hear you twice over in terms of the intro, and then in the recording. And these words are also by Violet Hay, with a slight alteration, I think, from the thou to you.
You will hear us shows our life in spirit free, shows our life in spirit free, shows the glory of creation, God and man in true relation, children of the living God are we, children of the living God are we. Father, this most wondrous union we would prove in blessed communion. Take the truth, our bread from hand. Take the truth, our bread from hand. Drink the wine of inspiration. Rise in holy exaltation. One in you, redeemed, restored, forgiven. One in you, redeemed, restored,
Wow.
Yay.
So, everybody, that's the first time I've heard that.
Ooh,
So,
that's awesome.
and of course, I love jazz. I may have mentioned that earlier, I don't know. But I grew up in a house where jazz was just constantly being played. And bravo, beautiful
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
I just loved it. And Krista, I love your voice, that high register,
Thanks.
your ability to
Yeah.
sustain it with such delicacy was really lovely. And it felt, it felt like a jazz prayer. And I think that's,
Oh,
Yeah, I think
which
that's
is great because
Yeah.
the beauty of jazz is its spontaneity, right?
mhm.
And so may all of our prayers be spontaneous.
Oh,
Yeah,
beautiful.
that's amazing.
wonderful.
That's like exactly. That's that's an awesome thing to hear. It's like
So
exactly what
thank
I
you.
would want from that. Yay, that's so
Yeah,
good.
Krista, I'm just curious. As a vocalist and an interpreter, when you were presented this composition and this music, what were things that sort of came to you? What were qualities that really struck you in the music that you wanted to make sure you brought out with your performance?
I mean, it's such an intimate message. It's like the communion message. It's like, it's a little different from the other one we heard, the last one we heard, which is like these these your children gathered in your name, like all of us together, kind of celebrating. It's like it was just like this. It's this representing this like intimate moment with God, like this oneness with just kind of a one-on-one. So I think that was definitely in my thought and, trying to convey that. And I think the setting of it just made that really easy to do. So, that's...
Yeah, I think that definitely comes across.
Yeah, yeah.
It penetrates very deep.
Yeah.
I love what Désirée said about a sort of jazz prayer. I mean, of course, all of these are prayers, and it's really I'm really enjoying and appreciating expanding my own concept of what that can look like musically. something like what we just heard, I guess maybe for some people that would feel like a stretch, but I kind of I'm on the Désirée side of the spectrum in terms of having grown up around jazz, and it feels like a jazz prayer is the most natural idea in the world to me. And actually, just as an aside, there's a little genre of sacred jazz. I'm thinking of someone like Mary Lou Williams and other people like that. There's a really interesting world out there that goes back through jazz history of jazz styles and idioms being channeled into, as we were saying before, into sacred directions. But I love the idea that, a word that for me would describe that performance we just heard would be reverent. But there's different kinds of reverence. And so actually, that's a word that describes, I think, everything we've heard here is just sort of different flavors of reverence.
Yeah. Well, some of the contributions that have come in online are addressing some of what you've already started to get into, but I'd love to hear just some further thoughts, and that is, how does the established repertoire and this new repertoire, how do they sort of engage with one another? How can they both be embraced and have sort of share together in the expression of Christian Science in our time?
That's a good question.
Well, I mean, I would, from my standpoint, there's room for everybody in that inn,
Yeah.
And our churches, our communities, and the people outside of our communities are comprised of all different kinds of people. And for me, there are certain traditional hymns that evoke memories, that evoke healings that I've had, that just, I would never want to replace those. They're there. And, people say it's a both and I have never really loved that expression, but it applies here. I think there's room for all of these different modes of expression through music. And we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think the idea of being all embracing is just broadening our representation of one mind, all embracing.
Yeah. Sort of seems like the more the merrier, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't go wrong.
Exactly.
Well, and it's kind of it goes along with something that I was thinking about in preparation for this, in reference to the hymn with one accord, which we were discussing earlier. Just that sort of Pentecostal idea that there are many voices, there are many tongues, but we all understand each other. That what's really speaking, whether the genre is traditional hymn or contemporary hymn or something that's very pop influenced or something that's jazz, it's the voice of God, it's the Christ that's speaking through these, and we can understand that. That speaks through the apparent differences in style and form and all of that. There's a higher and deeper unity that encompasses all of these communications.
Andrew, I enjoyed so much your description of your creative process and the fun that's a part of it. And it made me think about how in certain things that I've studied about hymnody in prior ages, that those hymns were fun for people. I was watching a program about William Blake and his poetry, which was very much inspired at times by the Welsh hymns of the time, the hymns by the Wesleys, and they were sung in the streets. They were part of the carnival and culture of the time, and now perhaps they've been relegated to this position where they're treated with some seriousness and reverence. But that was not the case in their earliest moments. It was something that was embraced with spirit and that feeling of joy and exuberance that you were describing in your creative process.
Right, and the thing that's actually so neat about being involved in this, webcast and hearing, the music that Désirée, brought to it. And even honestly, this was sort of one of the fundamental ideas that I wanted to bring to, some of these hymns, is that, we get so familiar with them, and it's almost like, we can just sort of lie down and go to sleep with them. but the idea of really trying to hear them in a new light and in a new way, and the vigor and the energy that we can and we should be bringing to these hymns, because there's so much power in these hymns, in things that are the 08 supplement, the new supplement that's coming out, all the way back to the 1932 hymnal. There's so much power, and there's so much just incredible, even metaphysics, especially metaphysics.
Yeah.
That I think, the approach that we can be bringing to these is just one with a sense of newness, a sense of freshness, life, vigor, energy. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a raucous energy, but just, a mental energy. It's really the thought that we bring to these things that really determine, everything, as we in Christian Science, that's, sort of a fundamental approach to what we bring to everything. And that was what was so interesting and exciting to me about going on this sort of musical journey and taking these hymns that we know and trying to rethink them and reinterpret them. I mean, it's so fun to hear, Désirée's contribution, and I'm really excited actually to hear this celebration CD, just to hear how many different, contributions came from all over the field and just different styles and how they all come together, and just to hear what thought and what life and what energy they brought, to these hymns is really exciting, and I'm really just, humbled and grateful to have been a part of that. I think it's a really neat thing. And I can't wait to hear it.
Well,
Same here. Thank you so much, you guys.
Well,
Thanks
thank
for
you
bringing
too.
me
It's
into it.
really been a wonderful hour spent with you, and thank you so much for the work you've done and being with us today. You can't see me that well, but I am levitating, just so you know.
We can confirm it. He is.
Just one quick question, Ryan. It's come up. When can people anticipate the new supplement? Do we have any further sense of that?
We don't have a hard release date on that just yet. I could say it's a question of months, and not many months.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, great. Well, with just a huge hug from the Atlantic to the Pacific to both of you. Thanks so much, Andrew and Désirée. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Krista. Thank you all online. We just so appreciate you as an audience and your involvement. And this is all really being done with you in mind, and with our utmost gratitude to you as people who are invested in these same kind of subjects that we're invested in. So. With love from Boston, I'm Jonathan Eder here from the Mary Baker Eddy Library, and I just want to salute our wonderful production staff here at the center here. They're just magnificent. So all the best, and have a wonderful holiday season. And in that light, Andrew has another album called "Oh Holy Night," which is wonderful for the holiday season. So you might want to check that out.
Yay.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.